Okay, one last thing. Imperialism. We talked about imperialism, and one of the things that we have to note is that the rise of imperialism is motivated by industrialization. And what I mean by that is, for example, if we look at England, I told you about England before. The British Empire was built on textiles, cotton textiles, right? The problem is that in England, they don't grow cotton. Okay. So if you're going to make cotton textiles, you got to get cotton somewhere. And at first, they got it from the American colonies. But after the Civil War, or during the Civil War, they found that source was not reliable. So they went elsewhere and they got it from Egypt and eventually from India. Right. Okay. So now what's happening is that uh, England is importing cotton from India. And we would think, okay, well, that sounds okay. I mean, if we're going to have a textile factory, then I'll find somebody that has cotton, and I'll say, okay, you give me your cotton, and I'll give you something in return, some money or something like that, right? But because Europeans were advanced technologically over the rest of the world, the English were able to go to India and say, look, you guys have cotton, and we have guns. So if you give us your cotton, we won't kill you. Right? And that's essentially what imperialism is. Imperialism is that the people of England are able to control the resources of India through military power. So imperialism essentially is a quest for resources and markets. England needed resources to make all these cotton textiles. And once they'd made all the cotton textiles, they had to have someplace to sell them, right? So they imported the cotton from India, and then they sold the textiles back to India, right? And India was there only to create wealth for the mother country, right? You guys follow what I'm saying? Okay, Americans are going to do this as well, but Americans are going to do it in a slightly different way, because instead of ruling other countries, the United States um, will find other ways to control the economy of other countries, right? And we'll talk more about that. I have a lecture in like two weeks, I think, on industrialization, right? So, at any rate, the United States will be an imperial power, but it won't be like the European imperial powers or like Japan, right? Because the United States doesn't need to go outside of the United States or outside of the North American continent to find resources and markets until much later, right? America has access to the West, which gives them access to all the materials that they need, and the population is growing, so they have plenty of markets, right? So they don't really need to look overseas for an empire, because we have an empire right here now on our own continent. You guys follow what I'm saying? Questions, comments? All right, okay. But now that's the kind of economic aspect of imperialism. But there's another aspect of it as well, because what I'm doing is I'm going to your country, say I'm going to your house and I'm stealing your stuff, right? And I have to somehow justify that, okay? I have to be able to justify the fact that I walked into your living room and stole your couch, okay? And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say, well, I could say it one way or the other. I could say, okay, you weren't using the couch right anyway. You were like drooling on it and stuff like that. So I'm going to take better care of the couch than you did, right? So therefore I deserve the couch. Okay. You guys get what I'm saying? Or I could say, well, you guys can keep the couch, but I need to show you how to use the couch correctly, right? And that's going to be the Western way of doing it. The Western way, we're going to kind of summarize it in a phrase that's the name of a poem by Rudyard Kipling called "The White Man's Burden," right? The white man's burden,
Yeah.
and the idea behind that is that the white Europeans are at the pinnacle of civilization. Why? Because they're white Europeans, right? And everybody in the world that's not white is somehow not as advanced as the Europeans.
Professor,
And yes,
my last professor described it as a like European exceptionalism, where
yeah.
they just view everything they do as like just the pinnacle, and they try to like essentially save everyone else
Well, that's
with their
yeah.
greatness.
That's the ideal. That's also the ideal behind American Mission, and the idea behind Manifest Destiny.
Yeah.
right? The idea that the American way is the best way and that you better do it this way. And we're going to show you how to do it, right? Okay, but now let me go on a little bit further here, right? So it's kind of like we can think of all of the civilizations of the world as children in a family, right? And that when you say you're in a family, I don't know if you guys have brothers and sisters, right? But say if you're the older brother, right, and you have a younger brother, then you feel responsibility to help that younger brother to learn the ways of life, right? Okay, and that's the way the Europeans will think about themselves. They'll say, okay, well, we have reached this pinnacle of civilization. Our mission is to help you guys along. The British called it the civilizing mission, right? To civilize people, which is ironic if you think about it, because the people of India were civilized centuries before the Europeans, right? The people of India already had a thriving civilization, while the people of the British Isles were running around in the woods naked and painting themselves blue, right? You follow what I'm saying? All right, so it's an ironic thing, and it's really not. It's not valid. It's not valid to say that that there is some pinnacle of civilization that can be reached, and that we're there, and everybody else should be there with us, right? But that's the driving motivation, right? So that will drive some European imperialism, also American imperialism. Americans go to places and they say, we're here to bring democracy. Why is the United States in Iraq? Because we brought democracy, right? Why did the United States bomb Libya? Because of democracy, right? You listen to any of the presidents. It could be George Bush, it could be American, it could be Barack Obama, but they both justify American military force by saying that we support democracy. Well, does America really support democracy? Yes, it does, right? But America is selective about where it enforces it, because they enforce it in Libya and Iraq where there's oil, but they don't bother to enforce it in Rwanda, right? There's a huge humanitarian crisis in Rwanda. The United States doesn't care a bit about that. You follow what I'm saying? So why do they care about Iraq but not Rwanda? You follow what I'm saying? That makes sense to you guys? Okay, so we'll just leave it at that, and I'll get back and we'll talk more about that later. But the main thing is here is to make that link between. Let me just say one last thing, and then I'm going to let you guys go. Right, modernization is the dilemma of the 19th century. Okay, because all of the countries in the world can be divided between those that are modernized and those that are not. Okay, and the modernized countries like Britain and France and Germany and the United States and Japan eventually are going to be modernized, meaning that they, let me just say it this way. Modernization, you should write this one down. Modernization means to look like the West. Okay, well, how does the West look? What does the West look like? You know, it's got a saguaro cactus and, you know, tumbleweeds and stuff. No, that's not it, right? It's got liberalism or liberty. You guys remember we talked about liberty the other day with the exclamation point, right? And it's also got industrialization. So to be a modernized country, you have to have liberalism and industrialization, right? And that you'll see all of the industrial countries of the 19th century were both of those things, right? Other countries that are not modernized end up being essentially prey to the modernized countries, right? So the dilemma is modernize or be colonized, right? If you cannot modernize, you will become colonized. And where we can see this really starkly is in China. China, at the beginning of the 19th century, was the most powerful country on earth, the most powerful, the most prosperous, the most advanced country on earth, right? But because they believed that they were had already achieved the pinnacle of civilization, they ignored the threat of the West. They said they thought of the West as a bunch of barbarians, and they didn't make any effort to modernize. And in fact, they were against modernization. They said, "Why should we modernize? We're already the best, right?" And the result was that by the beginning of the 20th century, they're so weak that they're what they call carved up like a melon, right? China became so weak that the European powers essentially carved it up into spheres of influence, and the Americans were in on that as well, right? Okay, so that was China's lesson. Japan noticed that lesson. Japan noticed that China didn't modernize and became colonized, and their response was to deliberately modernize. So they went through this very painful modernization period called the Meiji Revolution, right? And the outcome of it was that they became a modernized country. But ironically, when they became a modernized country, they also became an imperial power. They also became a colonizer. Why? Because they needed resources and markets, right? Okay, so the dilemma that we're looking at then in the 19th century is modernize or be colonized. China didn't modernize and they were colonized. Japan did modernize and they weren't colonized, but they became colonizers, right? You guys follow what I'm saying? All right, so that's kind of the economic formula, I guess you could say, for the 19th century for imperialism. And it's all driven by industry, all right, by the Industrial Revolution.